All right, Beyond listeners, welcome back to the Beyond podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Flora, and you all know this fabulous man, Sanjay.
Fabulous.
Yeah, you got a compliment. Last time Sanjay was on the podcast, you all loved it, and we are silly and funny enough that I'm sure my team will find plenty of bloopers again from this episode. But really, honestly, all jokes aside, this episode is going to be special to me and to Sanjay because, as you all know, if you listened to my solo episode a few weeks ago, I talked everyone through my new diagnosis of depression and things that led to it and help and support and treatment that help me feel better. And all of the meantime, Sanjay was there as my rock and as someone that I think has learned over the years. We've been together for 20 plus years, learned through the years of how to deal with mental illness. That was a really long intro, but I just wanted to say, I'm going to welcome Sanjay to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. You are listening to Beyond, and I'm your host, Dr. Flora. Listen, life is hard. You don't have to do it alone. As a mindset coach, physician, mom, and an infertility warrior, I have mastered techniques to help move you towards contentment and growth. I can't wait to go along with this crazy-ass life journey with you while making sure you feel like your best self. This podcast is meant to have you feel unstuck from your rut and less alone. Let's do this. So what we're going to cover today is what our understanding has been growing up in traditional South Asian households, what our understanding has been of mental health struggles. I'll kind of go into when I realized I had anxiety, depression, or depressive episode. It really wasn't formally diagnosed until recently. And then how we worked as partners to help each other, not only with my slightly more severe mental health struggle, but just honestly going through day-to-day life communication. Life is heavy. Life has a lot going on, and burnout and exhaustion and loneliness are all potential risk factors for anxiety and depression and how we kind of deal with that. And then overall, really, if you have a partner, you know someone close to you that is going through mental health struggles, whether it's anxiety or depression or it's a huge spectrum, what you can do to help them not only manage, but find the right support, a medical team, and treatment. So hopefully this will be helpful for anyone that is listening. So let's start with what your understanding of mental health struggles were when growing up. Your household was a little less traditional, I would say, than mine. You had my mother-in-law is very progressive and grew up in a progressive household in India. And my father-in-law, I think, kind of makes it a point to kind of go against these stereotypical gender roles that I think a lot of South Asian households typically follow. So yeah, in that setting, what was your understanding?
Well, I think the biggest thing was there's what you understand in your own family and then what you see around you in the community. And I think even as a kid, it was very clear that there are significant mental health concerns in the Indian community that you just pick up on, and it's just kind of brushed aside. That's the thing that pokes out of my head is that as a child, things just seemed off at certain places, at certain people's houses. And it just was explained to, that's just how they are. Or there was never that person has depression. They're struggling with this. And they're on medication treatment. There was not even a mention of those things. And only until later in life when I had conversations with my parents about what kind of things did this trigger in you, coming from another country, coming to this country with no money, living, very, very meager. Those are all things that will trigger depressive type episodes. And I learned late in my life that there was depression in my dad's side of the family, pretty strong. evidence of it. And it didn't really strike me that it was a part of my life until in high school. I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine, and it came across that probably every one of my friends had some sort of like depressive episode. And particularly in the women friends of mine, it was probably all 4 or 5 of the closest like women friends I had some sort of self-injurious behavior that they told me about in like senior year of high school. And it didn't click until then. You just, everything's kind of put under the rug, covered up. And then it just kind of came out later on when people felt more comfortable talking about it. So thankfully, I feel like in my world growing up, I didn't struggle with that, but I also look back and I realized it's kind of strange that I didn't pick up on it from other people. And so finding out why was I just kind of oblivious to it was probably because in our culture, we are kind of brought up to be a little oblivious to it. So
yeah, there's a lot of stigma, I think, around the word depression and the word anxiety. So it was taboo to say someone had a diagnosis of depression or had the diagnosis of anxiety. We also had mental health struggles in our family and our relatives. And it literally, I still remember my parents saying like, oh, this person is just crazy, or this person has some psych issues. Right. And it was this overgeneralized category that, you're right, it was kind of brushed under the rug and we kind of moved on with our life, when in reality, I think with the right help and support and treatment, I think our relatives could have gotten some significant help and maybe would have changed the trajectory of their life, their job. And then I grew up in a very traditional, stereotypical South Asian household. Dad worked full time, mom ran the household. Both very difficult jobs. And mental health really wasn't talked about among our own family members as it being a possible issue. I've struggled with depressive episodes. I've definitely struggled with anxiety. And again, kind of the stereotypical stories of being the oldest child, lots of pressure to do well, really no outlet to portray any form of struggle because we were all supposed to do the same thing, right? All Indian kids were supposed to get good grades. We were all supposed to go to higher level education. We were all supposed to make a lot of money. We were all supposed to kind of fulfill these check boxes. Everyone was doing it around us. So if everyone's doing it around us, then we're doing it right, regardless of really how we felt about it. And so I think I didn't really put a label on it, I think probably until medical school.
We met young.
Yes.
And when we met in college, I won't forget that before tests, right?
I had severe test anxiety.
Everything from passing out to...
Yes. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that. Yeah.
It was a common thing. Before certain tests, you'd have a syncopal episode.
Yeah.
And I had no idea.
Yeah, I know. We were babies. Oh my God, I put you through all that.
No, but it was also like, again, you look back on these things, and I think we were not in any way ready to kind of address those things. We felt this is just stress from school.
Yeah.
We get past it. It's a quick fix.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people out there kind of thought they had an episode of something and said, oh, this is just this one time.
Right.
And then you move past it. And then it comes again, this is just related to the testing stuff.
We made excuses. We mirrored what our family did and kind of everyone around, not only our family members. And again, I want to just make sure that this is not to put blame on our parents and our family members. It was just, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. And so if you don't have the verbiage or the education surrounding mental health, how are you supposed to talk to your kids about it? Right. So I think they just, we're in a very different mindset trying to survive in the United States as immigrants and build a life for themselves, which is a completely different, I think, entity of mental health struggles. But yeah, you're right. Test anxiety was huge for me. I think it all stemmed from the need to do really well and the pressure of, if I didn't do well, what is going to happen to my life? It was so black and white, when in reality, we discuss with Gia all the time. She's a perfectionist. She got all of my qualities of like the perfectionism and a little bit of performance anxiety, even though she, thank goodness, knock on wood, is flying. I mean, she does so well in everything she puts her mind to, but it is something that we do discuss with her, that perfection is never the goal and it's not an all or nothing. And if you don't succeed to whatever that means to her, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. There is a way around it. All of us are still finding success, and we all had different journeys getting to that level of success. And we're still having our own journeys. I think I also realized that my first major depressive episode, and I'm saying depressive episode from a clinical standpoint. So major depression is diagnosed after you have signs and symptoms for 6 months. Depressive episodes, and there are a bunch of other medical terminology that we as primary care physicians, psychiatry therapists will use to describe mood. I want to say, I don't like the word disorder, but mood lability. So ups and downs prior to those 6 months or within that 6 month mark. So my depressive episodes would last maybe a few weeks, and then I don't know what would happen. I would snap out of it. But I think my first major episode was in residency. And it was after a string of nights. So that's one of my triggers, is not sleeping. And I was on night shift in the ICU. It was over the holidays. I was alone because everyone else was on vacation. Sanjay included. He had time off, so he went to go spend time with his family. And I was like, I'm on call. Like, why would you stay here? I'm not even going to be home because I'll be sleeping during the day and then, at work at night. And I think after a couple of weeks, I hit a wall, and I remember I was getting up crying. Like, I was waking up crying, and I had no idea why. I didn't want to go to work. I don't think I had major anxiety about it, but I remember my mom flew in, and I mean, I do have to give my parents credit. Like, we need them and they're here, hands down, no questions asked. So she knew I was struggling regardless of what we called it or what we labeled it. And just her sitting with me. I really didn't talk about why I was feeling low. I didn't talk about, I don't think I even knew what to label it, but I remember using the word depressed. And I also remember both my parents, my dad was on the phone, my mom was with me at the time. And both my parents were like, what do you have to be depressed about? Like, you're in residency. You got into med school. You got past it. You got into residency. You're married. You're married to a great guy. You're in Southern California. You're right by the beach. Like, you have all of these wonderful blessings. Like, you can't be depressed. And so then I'm like, okay, you're right. I'm not. And then a few days went by with my mom here, and she took care of me like moms beautifully do, cooked, and we went out, and I just had a few days off from work. And, then we just kind of went on with our life. I don't know. That was my memory of it. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, no, I also think, going back to, we're an old farty couple, but
we are
learning how to appropriately identify things that were going to make things worse or make things better. I was not ready for those things early in our relationship. In fact, I think I came at things more like, what do you have to be depressed about?
But it makes sense.
Yeah, but it's also like, you're exactly right. In my head, when you or I would kind of be talking about these things, it was more about, let's get perspective. Life is great. We're doing well. We're kind of, this is a hard part. We'll move through it and we'll get over it. And some of that is a survival mechanism that I'm sure a lot of people out there listening who went through the same thing or going through the same thing are in their own mind saying, just get past this, just get past this. That's the adrenaline. That's all the mental space that gets you to that point. But you cannot get over those hurdles if you also have clinical depression behind it. It's just going to keep you back. And so I think with that particular episode in my head, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, we have so much to be grateful for, quote unquote, which we did, but it shouldn't, devalue the fact that you were going through a depressive episode. And I was not there yet. I was just like, what are you doing? Come on.
Yeah. I don't think either one of us really understood it. I mean, I remember having a lot of anger and resentment against everyone back then, just because I'm like, I'm asking for help, but I don't know what I need. And others were also unable to understand what was going on. I also would like to add, I did not seek medical help, which I think would have been helpful if, I think a thing about depression or any depressive or anxious episode, no one's thinking clearly. And so even after I revealed that I had, depression recently and I was treated for it, I had friends that came up to me and were like, why didn't you ask for help? Like, why didn't you tell me? I could have helped you. I could have been there for you. And you saw it firsthand. Like, I was in no position to make any decisions, let alone ask for help. I think sometimes you hit a point where you're just like, I'm drowning and I am unable to swim right now. And so I think it's important for all of us to kind of be aware of risk factors or preemptive signs and symptoms, to just be like, wait, I'm going to check in with you. I'm not going to wait for you to reach out to me. And you don't have to ask people like, are you depressed or are you anxious? A simple like, hey, I'm checking in. I noticed you were distant. Or, hey, I'm checking. I noticed you were quiet. Or, I've been texting you. I would love to drop in if that's okay. Or why don't we, I don't know, go grab a coffee or, so if you're a friend or someone a little bit outside of the household, recognizing a little, like these little subtle changes, I think it's okay to reach out, maybe not label it, but just do it like a check-in call.
Yeah. I think that in this most recent kind of year, basically, of these symptoms with you, we're both in the medical profession. We are both very comfortable talking about these things. And I think early on we said, hey, is that what's going on?
Yeah.
But even in our mind, we're like, no, this is a something else. This is because of this. This is because of this.
There was a lot that happened in 2024 and a lot that wonderful things, but also a lot of horrific things. And I don't know, I think we both did write it off because I was being productive. And a few episodes ago, I did talk about high functioning depression, which is not a clinical diagnosis, but it is a subset under depression and often goes missed because you, as a patient undergoing depressive symptoms, are killing it at work, or you are putting food on the table, you are planning, you are doing all the things that you need to do. You're not showing those typical signs and symptoms that is what we think of when we think of depression. We think of someone stuck in bed, can't get up, can't do anything, crying, sad, or it's triggered by something, right? Triggered by loss or a traumatic incident. When in most cases, it's not that.
Right.
And I think, this could have gone both ways. And there's also a chemical portion of it, which I
think that's, you had asked me, what are the things that, what are the signs or things that you would have wished you would have known, but I would have wished I knew when this was going on. And I think looking back afterwards, you had mentioned this word from, I think, one of your therapy sessions, was that depression feels like a warm blanket or a warm hug.
A warm blanket.
And so you think that, when you're feeling depressed, you just want to avoid things. But if you think about it like that, when you're feeling these depressive symptoms, you just kind of give into it, and suddenly just giving into those symptoms makes you kind of, drown more so in those. And I started to see that. That was one of the first things to me that, you're kind of leaning more into that. And one of the times you were actually wrapped in a blanket. And I was like, interesting. This is not you wanting to get out of it. You're just kind of, leaning into it.
Yeah.
I wish it's a really good way of describing it that I had never heard. And so I think if folks are seeing that, where people are kind of just leaning into the fact of with those depressive symptoms, because they are they're seductive and they kind of bring you into this.
Yeah, that's a good word. Yes. These symptoms are seductive because eventually they feel comfortable. Yes, my therapist used that analogy when I was in the thick of it, because I remember telling her that I don't want to leave my bed or the couch. And I feel okay here, even though I know I'm not okay. Like, it's like this out of body experience. And she's like, that's because depression is a warm blanket. It is comfortable. It's you and only you. And after a while, that becomes you. And imagine getting out of your warm, comfortable blanket and throwing yourself into a cold plunge. And so that's the metaphor that she used when it affects someone with depression and they are isolating themselves. And then all of a sudden they need to show up to a social activity or show up to even go to work, or these things that we all take for granted. It takes a lot of mental and physical energy to do the simple tasks that and that's more severe, I think, depressive episodes. As a partner, I know we've talked about this, but for the sake of the listener, what were the challenges that you faced trying to support, like knowing what was going on?
Yeah, one of the biggest things and I think other people would understand this view, is that you're also having to, do your job,
yes,
and work and do your part of the household with Gia. And sometimes if you have the ability of both partners operating at, a good place, if work is busy, the other person can kind of be there and vice versa. The hardest thing for me is knowing this is going on, and it would be in a week or two where I would be slammed with cases and getting home late. And so the guilt of all of this was pretty significant. It was just, I'm at work literally in the middle of a case thinking, God, I know I'm going to be late today. It's another day. We're not going to be able to kind of talk about this, figure this out. That was probably the most significant memory I have from, you just feel inadequate. You feel like
you feel helpless.
Can't be there and take the time. And so it actually got to the point where I remember kind of, choosing to change, like take days off, move cases around so that we can prioritize that. And that's not something we're good at, especially as clinicians, especially for those who are, doing procedural things. You don't have that option.
Yeah.
And when you do, you're not trained to say, oh yeah, I can do this elective case now, or I can use this day to do other things. And so I had to kind of really unlearn that part.
Also knowing that, or I can say this in hindsight, but at the time I didn't think I was ever going to get better. But from the outside perspective, I'm assuming knowing that things will get better, and this should not be a permanent way of life where you are taking on the burden of a two-partner job or two-partner expectation. I know there are a lot of single caregivers out there too that are, phenomenally doing a job that is meant for a village. But I guess the expectation of if you have a long day at work, or if I have something to do on the weekends, that there is an expectation that, expectation and communication that, hey, I need to work Saturday morning. You got the dishes, you got breakfast, you got all the morning stuff that we need to do and activities. I guess we've never talked about this, but how did you find support? Did you? Or how did you have?
Yeah, I don't think I did. I think there's a lot of being on this side of it that I look back and say, oh, I'm glad we're here. I'm glad we got through it. But so many things I would have done differently.
Yeah. Like what?
Well, I think this is great because I know tons of people out there who are just still not comfortable talking about it. And I think coming out there and talking to folks about this and being open about it is huge, because I don't think there was a time where I'd be like, oh yeah, let me just go talk about my wife's depression to the
I hope you're not randomly talking about my mental health. But no, I get it.
No, but my point is, I have close friends.
Sure.
And they were, they were clearly, they would be there for us. But there's this idea is this is us. No matter what happens out there, this is us.
Yeah.
It should stay here. And some of that is important, I think, but as a trust element. But some of it is you have to be able to be in a position to be there for you. And I think this is something as partners and caretakers in this mentality is we want to be the person there for you to take care of you. We want quick fixes. We want to fix things. And so it's what can we do here to make this better? What can we do to make this go away? And, we're not trained at this stuff. It's not, I think that if I were to go back in time, I have many close friends who've gone through this too. I know they've gone through this. It would have been better for me to say, hey, I need to talk to you about this. What was your experience? And there's not a doubt in my mind that they would have, been totally open with that.
Yeah. I guess it also would matter. It would depend on the couple or the partner's preference as well. I'm sure if you came to me, even when I was in the thick of it, and said look, I need to, I need a release as well, and I need to find support, because we've gone through something similar with infertility, where often the partner that's not undergoing the actual procedure is kind of left behind, really. And when in reality, both partners are grieving, both partners are going through kind of this weird emotional roller coaster. Oftentimes the partner that's going through the in vitro portion of it is taking the physical brunt. But I think we also realized that you as a supporting partner needed time off, or needed time to reset and recharge. So I'm sure if you had come to me at that time being like I'm going to take a night off, or go have a 2-hour conversation with a friend, even if it's at home over the phone, I'm sure I know I would have said it would be okay. And then also realize that I can't help you in the moment, but you also need guidance and support. So caregivers or partners, don't forget about yourselves too. I know it's hard to put yourself on the priority list when someone that you love is struggling. But guess what? If they don't have you at your maximum potential, then they won't have you. And so it's important to take care of yourself so you can provide. And that, I feel, is like a general rule of thumb, and that could be applied to anything in any situation. Take care of yourself so you can be there for others. I don't know. We're so open with each other when it comes to a lot of stuff. I mean, I'm such a big talker anyway when it comes to mental health.
Really?
But it's funny that you said, like, you know, people don't normally open up about this. And when I did, I got a bunch of comments like, oh, you're so brave. And just comments like that. I don't feel like I have anything to be embarrassed about. There's always, I think, a little negative voice in the back of my head being like, okay, I hope people don't see me differently because they know that I had mental health struggles. Like, I'm fine now, but you're never done. Even if you don't have a clinical diagnosis, right? We all go through ups and downs and periods of exhaustion and periods where we're just hitting a wall and we need to recharge and reset. I guess that's kind of how we support each other on a normal basis, making sure that our lines of communication are open and knowing all the things that you do as not only as a partner, but as a clinician. I think your clinical job is more emotionally heavy than everything that I'm doing. So for those who don't know, Sanjay is a interventional pediatric cardiologist. He fixes baby hearts, to say it simply, but it takes an emotional toll on you, especially when you're seeing patients that, you know, you see your own child in, or you are such a good empathizer. So you empathize with the parents or with the kids or the struggles. I think it's important that to prevent those risk factors from running into clinical depression or anxiety, it's important to keep those lines of communication open and know that this partnership will never be a 50-50. Like for any partnership, it's never going to be exactly 50-50 all the time. Kind of, if there's like a spectrum, right? And we're on opposite ends, we're just constantly like pulling and pushing and figuring out how we can meet the other person, just meet them regardless of where that is, whether that's at the 50, you know, the 50% point or something less or more. And I think that's important to consider for any partner to prevent those risk factors from developing.
You know, you and I have, especially early in our relationship, struggle with that.
Yeah, I think most, you know, in most relationships, it's a learning experience of how the other person communicates effectively, or if the other person communicates, and not taking things for granted.
Yeah. I think I would just not communicate about those things. I would just say, it comes back from that, oh, this is just what you do. You deal with it, you move on, you deal with it, move on. And I think you were the first one who kind of said, you are not moving on from these things. You know, whether it's, you know, a bad death in the hospital or something that was going on, just because you're not addressing, you're just continuing on to the next case, the next, And so you've been very good about identifying when I'm like that. And I think, you know, you didn't mention this. You all have ways to kind of acknowledge that, you know, that hardship and process it. And so for me, it's going out to the water, staring out in the water, and then moving on. And that's kind of how it's always been. It's just been a very therapeutic thing, which is why we don't leave the water.
Yeah, it's hard to leave where we are. Everyone kind of has their own patterns too, right? So it's important to recognize what your burnout pattern is. Sanjay's burnout pattern that I've started noticing, especially after Gia came along, is he would just go. I mean, he'd be sick, or whatever obstacle would come in the way, Sanjay would just plunge forward, and then he'd hit a wall. And then I would not have a functional husband for like a week because he exhausted himself. And I remember telling you that you can't do that. I can. That is not mentally healthy, but physically, especially as we get older, I think, I don't know, I've always realized that I can't pull these 24-hour days. Sanjay is a night owl and he can function with very little sleep, but even that's been catching up with you, I feel like, in the last few years. We deserve rest. We deserve to feel a recharge, and whether that is engaging in external hobbies that, you know, kind of fill your cup, or truly saying no to like an activity or a social gathering or an invite because we just need to lounge and rest. I mean, that was a recent thing. I think there was a social gathering. And I remember telling Sanjay, I'm like, look, I'm really tired. We've been on the go all day. I think I just want to recharge because we got work tomorrow, so on and so forth. And Sanjay was like, I want to go because I want to see everybody. We haven't seen them in a while. And then he's like, you know what? I think I need to recharge too. So the three of us, me, Sanjay, and Gia, we just had family time and actually did help with recharge. So then we can move forward with all of the activities that we've been doing in the last few weeks and with work and just being on the go. So I think it's worthwhile to check in with your partner, even if they don't have a clinical diagnosis. This is all a spectrum, right? We don't want things to lead in the wrong direction. But yeah, I think that's the lines of communication and also just being honest with yourself. I think you resisted for a while.
I still think I do.
Not as much. I think your old age is like,
hey,
it's catching up with you. We're in our 40s. Well, I'm 40. Sanjay's 41, but we're not that old. But gosh, compared to our 20s, you're just such a. I don't know. I've changed completely. I don't know about Sanjay, but
I'm at the pinnacle of my life.
We are. But on being in like your late 30s, 40s, I think is a great mental state. I think we have this sense of confidence, and that at least Sanjay and I were just like, look, if you don't vibe with me and vice versa, and we're not along the same like wavelength when it comes to values and friendship and relationship, bye. Let's move on to the next person. Or, we have a good set of friends and like a support crew that, the FOMO isn't as strong. I don't know. We're just a little more sure in who we are.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. So getting old is not all that bad, I think. What's like one piece of advice? If you had someone that's listening and their family member, partner, friend, they're seeing those signs, even if it's subtle. And I'm going to kind of use myself as an example. Again, hindsight is always 20/20, but looking back, and some of my friends actually called me out on this after they figured out what was going on. Like, you were quieter during this conversation, or you didn't answer my text message as quickly as you normally do, or, hey, I reached out, or I called you a couple of times and you sent me to voicemail. I know something was off. I had one friend just tell me like something was off. I didn't know what, but I know you had a lot going on, so I didn't say anything. Even if a listener is noticing those subtle signs and symptoms in a loved one, what would your advice be as like the supporter role?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, again, using our example, is even in a household that is open about these things and has trained to identify things like depression and are familiar with these terms, it was never really, we never pulled the trigger on it. It was just kind of like, oh, this is just the next thing. Oh, the next thing and the next thing. So I think listen to the voice in your head that says, hey, this is not normal for us.
Yeah.
And to bring it up.
Yeah.
Because I think when we first, it wasn't even until middle of the year, you already had 6 months worth of symptoms, I think. And in that time, a couple of these things, the anhedonia, or just the things you'd usually like to do, you just didn't want to do.
Anhedonia is a clinical term for decreased interest. And you're right, I did lose interest in things that I normally would find joy in.
So that was the trigger for me to say, okay, let's have a conversation about this. And then it was, I don't have time to go, right? It was, I don't have time to find a therapist. I don't have time to do this stuff. And so that delayed.
It can be overwhelming. I mean, when you're in your feels,
But it delayed us kind of actually getting help, probably about 2 months, I'd say. And then it was kind of like, okay, we're at a point where it's clearly even worse.
Yeah, I got to it was an extreme point, and that was, even then it was too late. Not too late, but it was later than what we should have waited for.
So, if you're having these conversations, do yourself a favor and just say, hey, let's come up with a plan, and everything needs to kind of go on hold for a second while we figure this out. Yeah. If it's take a day off to logistically find a therapist, find a psychiatrist, whatever it may be, you at least get that on because it might not be an appointment next week. It's not going to be an appointment next day.
Yeah, that's another thing.
A 3-week appointment.
In our current healthcare system. Or, make an appointment with your primary care doctor. I'm still going to put in a personal plug because, I'm biased, but your primary care doctor can help you they can be a part of your support system. Don't forget about them. They have resources. They have the ability to counsel, to link you to a therapist, to start medication if indicated. I'm not saying everyone needs to be on medication, but they can help triage this for you. Because oftentimes, even as a partner, you're seeing this person every day, and it's not an objective point of view either. So I think having a clinical objective point of view when someone who doesn't know you intimately is listening to your symptoms, I think is also a good add-on. And even if it's from a partner standpoint, helping your loved one find an appointment or find a doctor, man, that can take such a load off of someone's shoulders, because it is really overwhelming and our healthcare system sucks. So it helps. Yeah.
No, I think that with so many of these things, just take the time early, because the other part about this is, if you're used to being, a certain equilibrium with your relationship where you kind of say, hey, if my partner needs something, she'll be able to kind of tell me and say these things. And then suddenly they're going through something like depression where they're not. I mean, for so much of that last period of time before we actually got help, this is how it's going to always be. It's never going to get better. This is just the new norm. Yeah. And those kinds of things are again, red flag after red flag after red flag. So if we would have kind of said, hey, when we identify that this is a problem, just stop everything and say, let's do what we need to do to get this under control. Yeah. I think that those 2.5 months of just, oh my God, this is really bad, probably would have been a little bit different. When we actually did get help and, all the things that were needed, it was pretty night and day how things started to turn, how things started to change.
Even, it took me a while to get into a psychiatrist, but even starting therapy, it wasn't a quick fix. It never is. But again, it was an objective point of view in a clinical provider. And she was able to not only give me coping strategies, because here's the thing, and this was my own personal point of view, as a primary care physician and as someone that sees mental health struggles every single day when I go into the clinic. And then as a mindset coach, right? Someone who prevents or helps prevent these spiraling moments in our everyday obstacles. I employed every tool and technique that I knew worked for me. And then my therapist, well, even though she was giving us kind of tools and techniques, she just made me feel seen, heard, and validated, and also kind of made me feel okay that I was going through this. Like, it's not normal to go through this, and this is not what I want your life to be, but like, sit in this for a little bit. Don't try to recover too quickly, because you have to go through this to come out to wherever you're going to come out. I know it sounds weird because no one wants to stay in that low position in such a long time. But again, I think she helped me feel like we will get through this, but we're going to talk about stuff still when you're feeling like shit. And so I don't know. I think it was like a validation too, that one, you're not broken and this is normal. And two, you will get through it. We just need time and treatment. And so finally, when I did get into the psychiatrist, again, my approach was a little bit different. Being in the medical field, I had an idea of like what side effects were absolutely non-negotiable for certain medication, and what certain side effects I was like, okay, I think I can deal with from day to day. And so I went in with like a specific medication in mind, and I just let her, without even telling the psychiatrist what I had in mind, I told her my concerns. At that point in time, I knew I needed medication. I knew this was not simply life is hard and simply I am not equipped with the right tools and techniques. That was not it at that time. I mean, yes, we went through a lot of hard experiences in 2024. And if you don't know what I'm referring to, please go back and listen to my prior episode. But in the latter half of the year, after summertime, I think, it was just like the normal stuff. Like, school started, fall was coming up, all the holidays, like the normal stuff that we've gone through over and over again. And we almost have our planning and our expectations. We have it down pat. And so even at that time, that's when I actually hit my like low. And it was very apparent that I needed the help of medication to help balance out whatever was going on inside me physiologically so I can deal with the hardships with the tools and techniques that I've already mastered for myself with the help, continued help of a therapist. So I think it's just important to keep your mind, your brain open to all the possibilities. Because I never thought, I don't think I ever thought I would have ever had gone through this.
Yeah, but this is also like why I think I really like that you're doing this episode, because everybody out there who has not gone through this has that stigma. I don't think it doesn't. I don't think we're in a society where it doesn't exist. Like, oh, this person's on crazy meds. Oh, this person's on meds. She's crazy. He's crazy. Whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that there's also the perception. Oh, you're in LA. Oh, you're going to be on medication.
Yes.
All this nonsense that just is are people kind of just not really understanding what's going on. And then when it happens to them, they have this idea in their head, oh, I don't want to go on meds because I'm crazy. That makes them crazy.
I mean, the amount of patients I get coming into the door even saying that, like, look, I'm having XYZ symptoms. And I'm like, it's been going on for a while. I talk them through all their options. And the first thing they say, before I even mention medication as a possible treatment option, but I don't want to go on meds. And I asked them why, and they're like, I just don't want to be numb. And I'm like, who said that was the purpose? And again, it's important to recognize the spectrum of possible side effects, the spectrum, even the possibility that the medication may not work, that this is not an overnight fix. There is trial and error. And you're not out of the woods. Like, once medication is started and you're feeling better, life is still going to life and do its thing and throw you all the kinds of obstacles. So that's where therapy comes in. And even data shows therapy plus medication for those patients that need it is the best combination when it comes to the success of handling mental health struggles. So ongoing therapy, even if it's checking in with your therapist once a month, once you get to that point, is still okay. I think everyone needs a therapist. That's my hot take.
Hot take. This episode brought to you by therapy.
I know. Oh my gosh. If I could get sponsored. If you guys are listening, if anyone has any hookups, I'd love to talk. Sanjay, thank you. I love you.
I love you too, baby.
If you guys have any questions, I'm an open book. DM me on Instagram at Dr. Flora Sinha, Dr. Flora Sinha. Also, you can email me at florasinhamd@gmail.com. If you want to give feedback about Sanjay, because he's the best, you can also comment in my DMs. Follow the podcast at the Beyond Podcast on Instagram as well. We're listening to your DMs on that account too. So I hope you guys learned something. I hope you all take home little bits and pieces of information of how you can not only support someone going through, their mental health uphill battle, but maybe if you're recognizing signs and symptoms, to just talk about it. Maybe ask and see where that goes. Maybe, you'll find some support and help and you'll be a better version of yourself. So anyway, I hope this helps someone out there. I will see you next time. Bye. Thank you so much for joining and spending your precious time here with me. As someone who prioritizes her energy, I am so grateful that you chose to spend yours here. To help me help you, please take an extra 30 seconds of your time to rate and review the podcast on your listening platform. For more tips and a behind-the-scenes look into my life, follow me on Instagram at Dr. Flora Sinha. That's Dr. Flora Sinha. Finally, connecting with you truly fills my cup. So DM me on Instagram, email me at florasinhamd@gmail.com, repost if you love this episode. I love hearing from you. I am so grateful for you and cannot wait to be back for the next episode. Bye.